teachers of Reddit. What's the most interesting thing a child has brought in for show and tell? Someone brought air in a bag from his room. He opened it and tried to get everyone to smell it. He told everyone afterwards it was just a fart and everyone just lost it. I had one little guy bringing rocks and fossils to my class. Teacher here. Now, I love that stuff too. So I'd bring in pieces from my collection as well. It started with bits of obsidian, amethyst chunks, local mollusks in shale, and it went back and forth for several weeks. We even traded a few pieces. I'm friends with his parents, and they were cool with it. Then I brought in a big, complete fish fossil from a local river, complete with sparkling scales. He thought that was cool. Then he brought in a complete fossilized beehive. I was gobsmacked. I didn't even know this was possible. His parents and I contacted the local museum, and that fossil is now on public display. It is the finest of its kind found in British Columbia, and the kid dug it up on his grandparents' farm. A first grader brought the book Go the Freck to Sleep. Obligatory, not a teacher, but in kindergarten, we had a project that we each had a predetermined day where we had to bring in our most special / favorite things. One kid brought in his northeasts. A couple brought in toys or dolls. On my day, I brought in my dad. We were super poor at the time, and I know he didn't get paid for taking the day off, so I know my parents had to sacrifice to make it happen. I will remember getting to spend the whole school day with my best friend forever. Obligatory edit for gold. Thank you, kind stranger. If it makes you guys feel any better, my dad is my best friend. He's like the 60-year-old male version of me. As a kindergartner, I once brought a homing pigeon to show and tell. The class tied a note to its leg and we released the bird. The next day for show and tell, I brought the note. Not a teacher, but my mom is, and has wonderful stories. One of my favorites is this kid that forgot to bring something to show and tell. Instead of panicking, he just pretended to hold something about a foot big in his hands and presented his invisible car. I'm talking describing the structure of the car, where he got it. It was some basic store like Walmart or something. I can't remember. And how he liked to play with it. He even took extra care to carry it back and put it carefully on his desk, moving it a bit to the side so he could access his coloring sheet, just to have fun. My mom asked him about it a few days later and he goes, "Oh that? Yeah, I got bored with it, so I gave it away." What a neat way to wrap up his story. Kids are crazy creative. A bit difficult, but B had a pet day at school and most people just brought their cats and dogs. At lunch we did a big show where people with pets walked around in a large circle. I remember hysterically laughing, cause this one girl brought her pet fish and was trying to walk with it. We were probably about 6 or 7 at the time, so she was really struggling with the thing and trying to walk without sloshing the water. Props to her though, she loved her fish. A child's trekking stick made out of a human femur. Legit. Despite the legality of using human remains being in question, and some serious side-eye from me all year during conferences, the story of how he acquired it was quite interesting. Apparently, it was a family heirloom and the kid's great-great-grandson dug it up from his backyard in rural Virginia back in the early 1800s and named it, no joke, Lemuel. I had a kid in grade 1 bring in his sock. He said it was smelly and used it for training to cope with bad smells. 17 5-year-olds rolled on the floor in hysterics. Best show and tell ever. My son was assigned to bring his favorite book one day. Well, he was absolutely fascinated with the phone book that recently came. Took it to school. Later learned every teacher heard about internet generation kid who loves the phone book. Taught at a rural Canadian school last year. Kid in grade 6 brought in pictures of a hunt he went on with his old man. One picture was of this little 4-foot boy holding a severed deer head. "Check this crap out," was what he said to his friends as soon as he arrived that morning. Had a student who wanted to bring in a dummy hand grenade. He was somewhere on the spectrum and was super into military history and he could not understand why he couldn't bring it into school. It had no explosives, but was 100% accurate in every other way. To be fair, I had trouble understanding why he couldn't bring it in. I'm not a school teacher, but a leader for a program in a church. Stuffed animal night. Some little boy brought in a devil plush toy that said "I love you" in a creepy voice. I worked with the 3 5-year-olds. Out of the 16 there that night, 15 left crying and 1 left laughing. I can tell an interesting story. My youngest sister is adopted from China. We have a cousin, white like the rest of us, that's a model, and at this point, was in a lot of magazines like Cosmo, Vogue, etc. My sister brought in magazines to show off for show and tell. All the crappy little 3rd grade girls made fun of her saying that the girl in the magazines wasn't her cousin because of the white/Chinese thing. The next time it was my sister's turn, she brought in our cousin in the flesh with a bigger stack of magazines. Checkmate, bitches. When I was in kindergarten we did show and tell by the letters of the alphabet. IDK how others did it. So when we get to W I brought my dad. His name is Wes. I grew up around horses, so when we were on H my dad brought a horse for us to pet. The town I lived in was really small, so it wasn't the weirdest thing. Not a teacher, but my cousin brought me in for her show and tell item once. She was 5 and I was 1, so I don't remember it, but apparently her classmates really liked me. Not a teacher, but I remember a student brought in a sword, which he claimed his grandfather took off of a Japanese airplane that he shot down during the war. I don't think his parents knew he took it. One of my professors told me that when he was in 1st grade a kid in his class got his toe cut off in a lawnmower accident. The kid brought in his toe in a jar for show and tell. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school I brought in my pet squirrel. My dad had a schedule in which he was off work that day, so he brought her to the school for me in her harness and leash. This one guy I know brought in a limited edition Ultra Lord action figure 7 weeks in a row. My wife had someone bring a potato. They were poor and thought it was cool. I was the student. In grade 1 or 2 I brought a skinned rabbit face in for show and tell. My aunt from Newfoundland sent it to me in the mail, cause I guess they eat rabbits. I think this was close to Easter, which was most likely the reason she sent it then. Didn't realize how creepy that would have been for my teacher. I brought in pictures of my family vacation to the World Trade Center for a kindergarten show and tell that was on the 9th of October 2001. Every once in a while, there is a news article about some kid bringing in their parents' drugs for show and tell. Not a teacher, but I brought in both of my cats. Our school allowed kids to bring their pets in for show and tell, but most people brought in things like hamsters and mice and other small animals. I brought 2 fully grown cats. Not the teacher, but in 2nd grade, I forgot to bring an item for show and tell. I had a somewhat loose tooth, so I excused myself to the bathroom, casually ripped out the tooth with my fingers, walked back and showed it off to the class. My mother was called. To this very loosely, if it all fits your question, but I hope it's allowed anyway. This isn't for show and tell, but I've had kids come in with a few weird things. I teach preschool. The parents bring them in with their weird toy and laugh telling me it's what got us out of the house. Memorable ones are a spray paint can lid, 1-year-old, found in the garage on the way to the car. Dad had dropped off, and mom gave me the most WTF look when she picked up that night and I handed it back to her. A hair tie, a Hot Wheels and a handheld bubble machine that was broken. 3-yo. A little bubble wand necklace. 3-yo. With no bubbles in it. A bag of marbles. I think he was 3. A 24 pack of cheap dollar store crayons. 2 years old. $1 and some random change. 2 years old wanted lunch money in a baggie like his big brother. The best one though was a 2 years old who found a rock at the beach over the weekend and he would not let it go, mom said. His nickname was Pickle, and so I come into work to find a plain grey rock sitting on my counter with Pickle written in pretty letters by mom. Not a teacher but a student. To preface this, my family tends to have macabre humor, even when I was young. For show and tell one day I brought in a story. The night before, my mom and dad were in the garage building shelves with big rubber mallets. I walked into the room and asked what's all that banging, to which my dad, 10 feet away from my mom, started shaking the mallet at her and said, "Oh, I'm beating your mother." Suddenly the head of the mallet flew across the room and hit her square in the face, breaking her nose. But that's not what my class heard. They heard the story of how my dad was beating my mother with a rubber mallet and broke her nose. This resulted in some fun trips to the school counselor and a visit from CPS. Why did I tell the story to my class? In all the commotion I never got a toy for show and tell, and that's all I had on hand. It was a fun time on all sides. Not a teacher, but my little brother once made a rocket out of tampons glued to a stick and took it to school. The teacher called my mom and told her all about the rocket. He was in first grade, so the rocket was not a school threat, but it was just funny. Also, he once took a bag of grass to school and the school called and asked what his intentions were. He told the teacher that he likes dealing with the weeds with dad. In all reality, he liked helping dad garden and liked mowing the yard with his toy mower next to dad. One of my kindergarten students brought in a legit set of Russian Matryoshka dolls. Every time she opened one and there was another inside, everyone in the room lost their crap. Every time. Got a most hilarious show, until I can remember, lol. Not a teacher, but my favorite memory of show and tell. When I was in kindergarten, the first time we had show and tell, I bought in my favorite stuffed animal. Think one of the late 80s cartoons. It was one of those. Sitting in the classroom circle, I remember looking across and seeing the exact same toy being held by another little girl. We were so excited about it. She became my best friend and still is today, all because of a crazy stuffed animal. Not a teacher, but in junior high we had to do a presentation on a family member. A girl in my class did hers on her grandfather Richard D. Winters. She literally filled an entire poster board with just the medals and badges Winter received during his time in the service. At the time I hadn't heard of Band Brothers, but my teacher was huge fan and was freaking out during the whole presentation. I wasn't the teacher in this case, but a guy brought in a slave collar from before the Civil War. This was a history class, and we were discussing the early 1800s. We had all learned about slavery, of course, but seeing a thick iron collar and chain that were meant to be placed around the neck of a human being so they could be sold as property. To this day, it's the only thing I've ever seen that just felt evil. In first grade, the bad kid in my class brought in his pet snake in the front zipper pocket of his backpack. Wasn't show and tell, and I'm not a teacher. But in high school, some goth girl in my early morning sign language class was trying to smuggle a bullfrog in a big glass jar to her boyfriend. Her backpack was clearly super heavy and distended and the frog kept croaking in fear, but my deaf teacher couldn't hear it. That's all I've got. Obligatory not a teacher. I brought in my great uncle when I was in kindergarten. He fought in WWII and was an anti-aircraft gunner. He had a shell explode near him and had huge shrapnel scars on his legs that he showed off. I explained about bombs and debris, and he told stories about his time with the Canadian Army and lying about his age to go fight. My teacher thought it was pretty morose and that we were a bit young to discuss war, but I think he did a good job of explaining things on a level 5-year-olds could understand. My aunt from Washington sent me as she got from her roof and photos from when Mount Street Helens erupted for a science project. I got extra credit for that, and any time show and tell came around through the school years. Not a teacher, but I once took a mammoth's tooth in for show and tell once. It got passed around, and everyone seemed to be really interested in it. I had to leave it with the teacher during the day because I was afraid it would get damaged. My best friend in the 3rd grade went up and presented the teacher. He said, "This is Mr. Point teacher. He's very old and likes to eat carrots." He promptly sat down with a look of triumph. A kid in a couple years lower than me had a dad that was a banker. He brought in some cool play money and even handed some out to kids, including me. When I showed my play money note to my parents, they were shocked to find it was actually 2 $100 bills. I'm from the UK. A letter from the school went out to all the parents asking them to bring it back to school. Imagine that kid was in a crap load of trouble. Not a teacher, but a kid at a school local to me bought in a deactivated stun grenade. Teachers brought the army in. Kids were evacuated. My son feels his rock collection is no longer interesting enough. Not a teacher, but in high school one of my friends brought his newborn sister's placenta. Our biology teacher got all up in it and was handling it and seemed super stoked that my friend brought it to show. She gave him some gnarly extra credit if I recall. When my sister was in 1st or 2nd grade, a girl in her class brought in her mom's nudes. I took a sword in once wrapped up nicely and secretly. My parents had no idea and my teacher was very shocked when I swung that out. I can still remember the look on her face. My old secondary school tutor told us that when she did her training they had a show and tell day and a kid brought in a shark tooth necklace and said they were from real sharks his uncle had killed while away. He passed the necklace around and while talking one of the other kids went, "If these are from a real shark, why do they say made in China on the back?" The other kid, without missing a beat, went, "They were Chinese sharks." Duh. Not a teacher, but we had a kid bring a military grade smoke bomb of some sort into my high school once for some class project. He thought it was a dud. All I remember is a whole crap ton of red smoke and then everyone going home early. When I taught kindergarten I had a student who stole his mom's wedding ring and put it in a blue plastic Easter egg in his backpack in order to bring it for show and tell. He just wanted to bring something cool. But his mom was exasperated and said it wasn't the first time he had taken it. We never had show and tell and I was, and forever will be jealous. I'm not a teacher, and it wasn't for show and tell, but I brought my ferret to an evolutionary psychology class in college. She loved it and climbed through all the students' bags while we talked about natural fears of certain animals. Demonstration didn't work because people weren't very creeped out by her. A dryer sheet. He even passed it around for the class to smell it. I was in grade 12 BO when we had a two-bodied pig born in the barn. One nose, two eyes, 4 ears and everything further back doubled. I brought it into class and caused quite the stir. According to my 8-year younger brother, the teacher still talks about how awesome it was to see. My coworker's story. 5th grade. A girl came with her grandma to school early and asked if she could put a big 2-ball bowl into the classroom. It was the thick colored plastic with a lid kind. The science teacher saw nothing wrong and let her in. Class starts and the girl keeps going to the laundry basket, large plastic bin with handles they keep to hold lunch boxes. Finally the teacher follows her and is completely startled. After everyone had put their lunch boxes away, the girl had opened the lid of the bowl so her pet snake could breathe and simply let it hang out in the basket. The fun part is that she had lied to her grandma about having permission and the science teacher felt embarrassed for letting her into the classroom early. When I was younger my sister got my grandparents to bring a miniature horse to the school for show and tell. Mind you, they had to drive 3.5 hours to do it, and the horse rode in the back seat all the way there and all the way home. I think she won the award for coolest show and tell that day. We don't have show and tell, but when I was in elementary school our biology teacher told us that one time a student brought her a live dangerous snake. She was so scared. Apparently he lives kind of in the forest, so he somehow took a snake without being bitten. He went to the principal that day, but I think they didn't do anything to him, since he was so young, not done out of malicious attempt. Not a teacher, but I heard a story of a kid who, during winter, found a bee's nest which appeared to have been vacated of all bees. He brought it to school, and as it sat there it warmed up, that suddenly some bees came flying out. I'm a teacher, but I teach secondary, so there is no show and tell. However, one Friday after school, I was working late on paperwork. There were other teachers there at a meeting, so there was a smallish fight outside the school, and we pulled some of the students back into the building to call their parents and figure out what was UO. The teachers in the meeting and myself were watching the kids while we waited for parents. So anyway, one of the kids just pulls an entire hookah, a pretty big one, out of his backpack, and it was very surreal and strange. Damn, I wish adults could have show and tell at work. You could do a little presentation and tell jokes or stories or show off a cool hobby and it would bring you closer to coworkers GBH. In elementary school, 1991ish, I brought in a jar of mercury my grandfather got from working in a steel mill. The school didn't like that. My parents got it back. Not a teacher, but when I was a kid, I insisted my dad come in for show and tell. He is a chef and, at the time, working at a seafood restaurant. I used to love going to visit him at work and checking out the live lobsters in the tank by the kitchen. So, Dave, he brought chef hats for all the kids in my class and a few live lobsters for us to play with. It was hilarious because when they are out of the water, Lobsters are big and scary to 4-5-year-olds. I have a pic somewhere, but it really was one of my favorite memories of my dad, especially because he worked super long days, so I didn't see him a lot. Not a teacher, but my mom was a preschool teacher. I often volunteered during her classes over the years. They didn't do show and tell, but some of the funny things I saw were a sticky bug/mouse trap, a lighter, a random unopened condom. My favorite though was a kitten that got smuggled in a child's backpack. When I was in elementary school, my great-grandmother brought in her husband's military medals from his time in service during WW2. She sat with the class and explained all about his service and what each medal/ribbon represented. Close to 30 years later, and I still remember her sitting up front talking to us. Their mother's science set, which apparently is what a child at only 7 years of life will call a pipe and other drug paraphernalia. It took social services all but 2 hours to have the child removed. Now, a few months down the line, I'm learning they have already been housed with a few foster families, but it never works out. A truly lovely but troubled child. My dad found these opium bottles from the Canadian Pacific Railroad and he took it home telling me it was over 100 years old. My 9-year-old brain took it to school and we got a call. Not a teacher, but in 3rd grade I had a bunch of baby chicks hatched. I think I originally brought in a toy, but then my grandpa came by to drop off my lunch I had forgotten. Right when it was my turn to show and tell, my grandpa had brought in a runt baby chick he was keeping warm in his coat pocket. And instead of the toy, I decided the little chick would be my show and tell for the week. My teacher loved it. The kids loved it. My grandpa loved it. It was great. The token white kid in our otherwise all Asian international school had his mom bring in his baby brother for show and tell. Seeing her bunch of tiny 5-year-olds trying to make an even tinier baby laugh must have atomized our teacher's ovaries. When my son was in kindergarten, he had show and tell in his class. There was a book in his class, and each page had different animal faces with holes for the eyes, nose and mouth that kids could look through. During his show, until he turned his back to show the class a surprise, and when he turned back around to face the class, he had a page with the elephant face open and his dink in the hole of the elephant trunk. I got a phone call home. Other way around. But growing up we had a substitute teacher that would bring one of 2 things in for us when they came in to substitute. A tape of them competing on Wheel of Fortune or a family member's old KKK hood. Also not a teacher, but when I lived in Minnesota, one of the kids in my 4th grade class had a dad who hunted. This kid decided it would be cool to bring a deer testicle in a Ziploc bag and show it to everyone in class. Kid was promptly sent home for the day. My kid found a really cool fossil at his grandma's house. His great uncle, professor of geology, identified it and gave him an approximate age. His teacher asked if she could keep it in the classroom for the school year, so I mounted it on a stand and engraved a placard for it. Elementary school kids routinely brought their deer rifles to show and tell in the 1960s. It was no big deal. I'm a teacher, but this didn't happen in my class. It was one of the neighbor kids though. His parents had bought a remote farm a mile down the road from us. Early 1990s. 1st grader brought in a number 10 can full of his parents' farm crop production to show what they grew on his farm. He had brought a number 10 can full of marijuana in his backpack on the school bus to show in class. Parents had acres of crop, if I remember right. Some 20 or so. They had only lived there a year, so this would have been the first crop. Crop was burned. Parents went to jail. Kid went into foster care for a few years. 4-year-old brought his very recently deceased baby sister's ashes in an urn. We had no choice but to let him stand up and do his thing. It was horribly awkward for everyone involved, and then he wanted kids to ask him questions. Not a teacher, but when I was a kid I found some fossilized animal tracks in a big sandstone rock. I was able to chip them off in one big flake. I took them into school for show and tell. The teacher flipped at how cool they were. He said he was going to hold onto them and show a friend in paleontology at the college. Never saw them again. Late but a good one. My dad was a primary school teacher, and once a kid brought in a photo of her dad who had an accident at home. He was cutting something with a chainsaw and accidentally cut his left off. He was sitting at the kitchen table smoking, his bloody nub covered with towels and crap, and in a tourniquet. The leg was sitting on the chair next to him as they waited for the ambulance. When I was in 3rd grade, I brought in an arrowhead made of bone. I found it in the new gravel my dad got for the driveway. My teacher loved it so much she wanted to send it off to be studied. Don't think I ever got it back. I had a child bring in a set of journals his birth mother had written to him. He asked me to read aloud a section that explained why she chose his new parents to adopt him. He was so proud to explain to his friends how his birth mother loves him so much that she interviewed his parents to make sure they would love him as much as her, and that she wanted to make certain he was taken care of better than she could. Obligatory, not a teacher, but when I was a kid, my best friend brought a homemade prosthetic arm that his great-grandpa used. It had a part at the end where you could attach various tools with a screw. It was cool. A classmate once brought boxes of ducklings and baby turtles. Biggest hour of my life. I had a female grade 3 student bring in a sperm stuffy toy with a tag attached explaining how millions are produced, but only one special sperm made you. When I was in kindergarten, a friend brought his pet tarantula for show and tell. What he didn't tell us was that the spider had just molted, meaning there was an extra skin that looked like a dead spider. The real one was hiding. He got us to poke the molted skin with a little pipe cleaner, resulting in the real spider to attack coming out of hiding, scaring the crap out of all of us. I'm a teacher now, but when I was in kinder I went to my cubby to get my show and tell. I guess I decided I was hot because when I came back to the room I had taken off all of my clothes and didn't bring my show and tell. When they called home, my mom had to explain that she let me run around naked on hot days. I don't think they let me go to my cubby alone after that. Not a teacher, but I was that weird kid that brought in something interesting. A quick backstory. I grew up in rural Alaska, where we got a lot of our food from the nature. There was a program where you could get roadkill moose. When someone hits a moose with their car you get a call if you're next on the list and can go harvest the moose. Well, a pregnant cow moose was hit, and we got the call. My parents thought it was a good opportunity for me to learn about biology and saved the fetus in a little cardboard box. I decided it was a good time for my kindergarten class to learn about biology and brought the dead moose fetus in a cardboard box to show and tell. When I was in maybe 1st or 2nd grade, I brought in a cooler that a black bear destroyed. The bear got into the porch of my family's hunting camp. He destroyed the door and screens and then tried to get into a small cooler. There were claw and teeth marks all the way through this cooler, and it was totally mauled. I thought it was awesome, but I don't remember my classmates being as excited about it. Holy crap. Show and tell is real? I thought it was just a thing on Yankee TV shows. I'm in teacher training, but this happened when I was at school. This kid would always bring in his Tom and Jerry VHS, and the show and tell was us getting to watch an episode of it. One time, another kid who now understood how this worked brought in Scooby-Doo, and the class went apacrap wanting to watch that instead. The Tom and Jerry kid had a full-on screaming meltdown, and after that videos were banned from show and tell. If someone brought one in they only got to read the blurb and show everyone the box. I once brought a dried up lizard with a hole through its body in a Yakult container. It started to smell by the time I brought it to school. I had a friend who lived up in mountains, and he would often bring in his school bag slow worms. They really looked like snakes, and we would play with them during music class in our school table. I don't know why we did that crap, but teacher never found out. I remember girls would often scream when they saw the legless lizards on our table.